Hello and a very warm welcome. My name is Sri Krishna and I'm part of the Bangalore Literature Festival. On behalf of the festival and the Bangalore International Centre, a very warm welcome to WorldLit. For those of you joining us for the first time, WorldLit is the Bangalore Literature Festival's digital literary platform where we bring to you live stream sessions, video interviews, and podcasts with leading international and Indian authors. We're delighted, as always, to be partnering with the Bangalore International Centre for this. We launched WorldLit a few months ago, and we've had some very interesting conversations on the platform with the likes of Pico Iyer, Anthony Horowitz, Tracy Chevalier, Jonathan Drury, and others. We're quite excited about how the platform is evolving, and we hope to feature more authors in the days to come. Today, we're delighted to bring to you two outstanding authors, best-selling British novelist known for her psychological thrillers, and someone who describes herself as a lifelong Agatha Christie addict, the lovely Sophie Hannah. And in conversation with her, banker, author, inimitable storyteller, and someone who describes, and of course, someone who'd like to be described, and I'm sure is already at this point in time, known as the John Grisham of financial thrillers, Ravi Subramanian. Sophie, welcome to WorldLit, and Ravi, thank you for readily agreeing to be part of this. Your sessions at the Bangalore Literature Festival, I think not too long ago. Ravi, you were with us last year. I think Sophie was with us in 2018. Still very, very well remembered by our audiences. And we're glad both of you are with us again here. And over to you, Ravi.
Thanks, Sri Krishna. And a big hi to Sophie. Sophie, welcome on the show. It's a pleasure to be
Thanks for having me.
So I'll dive straight into the conversation, Sophie. I was just reading some reviews on your latest novel, The Killing at Kingfisher Hill. And if I look at it, Washington Post calls it the classic Christie. And Publishers Weekly says that fans of classic fair play puzzle mysteries will clamor for more. And USA Today says that Sophie Hannah does an egoless, silky job of reviving Agatha Christie's beloved Belgian detective Hercule Poirot. Enough so to hope that Hannah turns to Miss Marple next. Now, mysteries are typically the most difficult to describe. If somebody were to ask you, what is it about? And so it's always best left to the author to describe what the book is all about. So before we go ahead with the session and the other questions, Sophie, and because the session is about the killings at Kingfisher Hill, why don't you tell us all about the book, or whatever you can tell us about that book?
Okay, well, I actually find it quite easy to describe mystery novels because what I do is I describe the sort of mysterious plot hook, and then I stop there, which is ideal for describing a mystery novel because it makes people want to read it if you don't tell them the whole story, but just give them a little teaser. So The Killings at Kingfisher Hill is my fourth Hercule Poirot novel, and it starts when Poirot and his sidekick, who is Inspector Edward Catchpool of Scotland Yard, they are both on their way to the very posh and exclusive Kingfisher Hill estate, which is a gated country park estate in the English countryside. They're on their way there because a man who lives there, Richard Devonport, has summoned them because his fiancée is about to be hanged for a murder that Richard is certain she didn't commit. And it was the murder of Richard's brother, Frank Devonport. So Helen, Richard's fiancée, is imminently going to be hanged for this murder, and Richard is convinced that she's innocent. So he asks Poirot to come and sort it out. So Poirot and Catchpool, at the beginning of the story, are just getting on a coach. It's a sort of luxury passenger coach, and they are on their way to Kingfisher Hill to try and solve the mystery of who killed Frank Devonport. And when they board the coach, they notice there's a very distressed and frightened woman who is also, at first it looks as though she's not going to get on the coach, as though she might be a bit scared of getting on the coach, but then she does. And then about 10 minutes into the journey, she leaps up out of her chair and says, I cannot sit in that seat any longer. If I stay in that seat for the rest of this journey, I will be murdered. And Poirot obviously talks to her about this and tries to help her, and she tells him a very weird story about how a stranger has warned her weeks ago that if she sat in that particular seat, she would be murdered. And yet that is the seat she's sitting in. So Poirot's first question is, well, why did you sit in that seat? So it's all very mysterious. Nobody does get murdered on the coach, but somebody confesses to a murder. So while Poirot and Catchpool are on their way to Kingfisher Hill, two other things happen inside the coach that are related to two other murders. So Catchpool starts to think, this is very strange. How can it be that on our way to investigate this murder, we hear this talk of two other murders? This is very strange. And then when they get to Kingfisher Hill, there is another murder. There's a dead body in the house, and nobody knows who the dead body is. It's very mysterious. It's just this body, and the face has been disfigured, so it can't be identified. But there's a note that's found on the body that makes Poirot absolutely certain that there is a link between the strange incidents on the coach and this new body. So then he has two mysteries to solve: who murdered Frank Devonport, but also who is this dead body that's turned up in the house, and how is this new dead body connected to the strange events on the coach journey?
Oh, that's interesting. No wonder it's...
So many, many mysteries. I like to really pile on the mysteries and the mysteriousness, because as a reader of crime fiction, that is what I love most.
So no wonder it's topping the charts already, Hannah. And I think in India, it's got released on September 20th, and I'm sure that it'll be topping the charts pretty soon. So best wishes for that. Like always, like all your books have always topped the charts here. I'm sure this one too will. But my next question to you, Sophie, is how did you land this? In the sense that this is probably something which is which any mystery writer would die for, I would kill for. How did you land this coveted task of carrying the entire Agatha Christie legacy forward and writing novels about one of the most loved detectives?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure it's true that any crime writer would have loved to do it, because...
Oh, I would.
Well, some definitely would, but what's been really interesting for me is that loads of people have said to me, you're braver than I am. If I'd been asked to do that, I would have said no, because it would have just scared me so much to think I had to fill the shoes of Agatha Christie. Now, I adopted the opposite approach. I thought, well, nobody can ever fill the shoes of Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie is probably always going to be the biggest crime writing genius that the world has ever known. She's such a legend. She sold billions of copies. And so I just started out with the assumption that I was not going to be filling her shoes in the sense of being as great a genius as she was. That didn't feel like an option. So what I thought was, I'm going to see my role here as being kind of almost like a sidekick, a bit like Catchpool is to Poirot, or like Hastings is to Poirot. I'm the sidekick who isn't the great genius, but I'm still going to do my absolute best to be a vehicle so that the great genius can still have an effect. So, you know, one of the reasons I accepted the task when it was offered to me was that I thought, you know, this is a way to show the world that Agatha's character, Poirot, is still absolutely relevant today, and he's such a great fictional character. And I hope that it would persuade more and more people to read or reread Agatha's book. So that was great, because I felt like I was sort of working for something greater than myself. And in terms of the sort of feeling daunted by it, I always think, and this is something I teach in my Dream Author coaching program for writers, whenever there's an event that might make us feel daunted or scared because it feels like just too much for us, we always have the opportunity to think, is there a different way of approaching this? Instead of thinking, this is scary, this is risky, I'm daunted, and so I'm not going to do it, we can always think, this is exciting. This is a challenge that is going to stretch me beyond the level of my current capabilities. And therefore, yes, it's obviously going to be uncomfortable and scary, but I'm going to end up being a better writer and a braver person if I accept this challenge. So from the start, when it was suggested to me, my attitude was, yes, it is scary, but I'm going to choose to think of that as excitement rather than fear. And I'm just going to do it. And I also thought, what's the worst that could happen? If I do it and it's terrible and I make a complete mess of it, then the only person whose reputation is going to be affected is me. And I was willing to take that risk. If I'd have thought that I could somehow damage Agatha Christie's reputation or her brand, then I wouldn't have done it because I wouldn't have wanted to take a risk on her behalf. But I thought, well, even if I write the worst book ever, everyone's just going to go, this Sophie Hannah person's terrible, but Agatha Christie is still brilliant. And that's fine. I was willing to take that risk. And I'm so glad I did, because I've just loved every second of it. Writing all 4 books has just been an absolute joy. In terms of how it came about, I did not seek it out. I would never in a million years have had the idea that I should write Poirot novels. It would not have occurred to me any more than it occurs to me that I should be the Queen of England or, marry Clint Eastwood. I mean, these things just do not crop up in my brain. So it would never have occurred to me to suggest it. What happened was that my literary agent was in a meeting with HarperCollins, and he knew that they were Agatha's publishers, and he just thought of it off the top of his head. And so he interrupted this meeting, which was about something completely different. The meeting was not about me, and it was not about Agatha. And he just interrupted the meeting and said, hey, you guys publish Agatha Christie. I have this author who's a massive Agatha Christie fan. Why don't you ask her to write a new Poirot novel? And the editor said to him, no way, the Christie family would never want something like that to happen. We've suggested to them in the past that they could do new books, and they were absolutely against the idea. And so my agent rang me up and said, oh, well, I suggested this thing. And they said no. I was like, great. I wish you'd thought to ask me before suggesting it. And then the very next day, my agent rang again and said, the Christie family want to meet you. And I was like, what? That sounds very unlikely given what we said yesterday. And it turned out that the next day after my agent had made the suggestion, that same HarperCollins editor had had a meeting with the Christie family, just by coincidence. And the Christie family at that meeting had said, this is going to surprise you after everything we've said all these years, but we, the family, are now thinking we might actually want there to be a new book. Wow. At which point the editor said, well, that's a coincidence, because I had this agent in my office yesterday who thinks he might have the perfect author.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so then we had that meeting and we got on brilliantly, and it all just proceeded from there.
And that's how the entire series now. How many more books planned in this entire Agatha Christie series?
I don't know at the moment, because I'm sort of the junior partner in this enterprise and Agatha Christie is the senior partner. So what I do is I deliver each book, and I do my book events and my promotional activity, and I wait for the family to ask me if they want another one. And they may not. They might decide after a certain point, that was nice, but we don't want to continue this indefinitely. And I never know, I'm happy either way. I decided when I did the first one that for as long as the family want me to write new Poirot novels, and for as long as I've got ideas that I'm really keen on, then I'm happy to carry on. I would never desert Poirot, and I would try not to let him down. But equally, if at a certain point the family decide that they have had enough Poirot novels and they don't want any more, then obviously they are the ones who have to make that choice. And I'm really happy to just go along with whatever they decide. So I think there'll be my guess would be that there will be at least 1 or 2 more, but no firm plans at this point.
Anything beyond Hercule Poirot?
You mean other Agatha Christie characters? No. So I have been asked many times, do I want to write Miss Marple? Would I ever write Miss Marple? On one level, I would absolutely love to write a Miss Marple novel, but I also sort of feel that I shouldn't, because I feel that Agatha Christie is such a sort of legend and so much the queen of crime, that for one contemporary writer like me to write more than one of her characters, that would almost feel as though I was trying to be Agatha Christie, which I never can. So I'm very happy to stick to Poirot novels. And I think if the Christie family would like new Miss Marple novels, which, you know, I would love to read new Miss Marple novels, I think it would be quite exciting for them to maybe choose another writer to do that at some point in the future. But I don't feel as if it should be me. And I also think that somehow I've kind of got enough to do, and I want to do everything that I do really well.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to take on too much.
Okay. So, you know, I'm a bit struggling with the sequencing of the questions because I have too much to ask you, and you know, I'm just so. Pardon me if the questions seem to be a bit out of sequence. You know, from what you say and what I've read of you, and the fact that the family picked you up for writing, for carrying the legacy forward, you seem to be one of the biggest fans of Agatha Christie ever born. So
definitely one of
there
them.
There are millions of them across the globe, but I'm sure you're one of the. You know,
I'm definitely one of them. Yes, there's plenty of others, but I am one of them. Yes.
So, how and when did you first get introduced to Agatha Christie, and where did the relationship start, and how did it progress?
Well, the relationship started when I was 12. I had finished reading all of Enid Blyton's mystery stories, and I was an absolute confirmed mystery addict. I basically, from the age of about 7, when I first discovered Enid Blyton, I knew that mysteries were my favourite kinds of stories, and I've never changed my mind about that at any point since. So when I was about 12, I was too old for Enid Blyton, and I'd read all of her books. And my parents, who were very, very keen on supporting my reading habit, they knew that I needed to move on to some kind of more grown-up mysteries. And my dad used to go to second-hand book fairs very often, and he found a copy of an old Miss Marple novel, The Body in the Library. He found that book at a second-hand book fair, and he bought it for me thinking, oh, she might like this. This is a mystery. And he brought that book back for me, and I absolutely adored it. And that was where my lifelong love of Agatha started. From that point onwards, I read everything she'd ever written. I then reread it every few years, all her entire oeuvre. And yeah, I was a lifelong fan from that point on. But The Body in the Library was my first. And it's actually one that I recommend when people say to me, which they often do, you know, my son or my grandson has never read Agatha Christie, where would you recommend, you know, a newcomer should start? I think The Body in the Library is an excellent one to start with because it has all the sort of conventional Christie delights, but it's also a particularly well-crafted and flawless book. I mean, I've read it several times now, and you just can't find anything wrong with it, which isn't true of all Agatha Christie novels. So it's a very good one to start with.
Is that your favorite too?
It's probably not my absolute favorite, but it's certainly in my top 10 Agatha Christie novels. Yeah, I think my absolute favorite at the moment is probably The Hollow.
Mm-hmm.
But I have different favorites depending on where I'm at in my rereading schedule.
So did you, I believe you had to reread the entire Agatha Christie series just to make sure that you're consistent with your characterization of Hercule Poirot. How did you manage to?
I mean, I didn't have to reread. I didn't have to. I could have. I mean, I knew Poirot very well already from having read all the books 4 or 5 times. But when I found out that I was going to be writing a new Poirot novel, I decided I wanted to reread all of Agatha's Poirot novels just to kind of be really freshly immersed in, you know, Poirot and his world.
So how did you manage to keep Sophie Hannah in that particular book? I know it was Agatha Christie's novel, but how did you leave your stamp on that novel in terms of the story and characterization? And
well, I didn't even think
was one. I did notice that when I read your books, because the narrative.
Sorry, you noticed what?
That Catchpool is a big difference between the 2 novels, between the novels, and hence the narration clearly changes. So
Catchpool is my creation, and he's Poirot's sidekick for all of my Poirot novels. that wasn't really to put my stamp on anything. That was more because I knew that if I tried to do Hastings, I would get the voice wrong, because Hastings' narrative voice is Agatha Christie's prose style. And I don't believe that one writer can or should try to mimic the style of another. So I thought, well, if I create a new character in the form of Catchpool, then that will be a new person writing about and talking about and working with Agatha Christie's Poirot, who we all know and love. And I thought that was a brilliant way of reflecting the actual situation, because I'm a new person writing about and working with Poirot. So he's, you know, I haven't changed Poirot in any way. He's still Agatha Christie's Poirot in every detail, but I'm a new voice writing about him, and Catchpool is a new voice writing about him. So that just seemed a really sensible way to approach it. I never really thought, how do I put my own stamp on this? Because I guess I just take for granted that when anyone writes a book, they can't avoid putting their own stamp on it. You know, the kinds of stories that I make up. I mean, obviously I'm consciously trying to include as many of the sort of traditional Christie delights as I can, like an incredibly intriguing mystery, lots of clues, some red herrings, a denouement where the truth is revealed, you know, all those things. But I'm also, that there's a way in which all of the stories are very Sophie Hannah-ish. And that's one thing that readers often say, like that they love the fact that they can see all the Agatha-ish things, but they can also see all the me-ish things as well.
So you've managed to present Hercule Poirot in pretty much the same style, but have you ever got a feedback from your readers saying that, look, Agatha Christie depicted Hercule Poirot like this, you are depicting Poirot in a different manner, this is not what Agatha Christie would have done, or this is not...
I mean, occasionally someone will write an email saying something like that, and I will always write back and sort of explain that the way I read it, when I read Agatha's Poirot novels, he's not 100% consistent from one book to another. So he, in some books, in some of the Agatha Poirot novels, he does things which in other of the Agatha Poirot novels he says he'd never do. So there is, and I don't think that's a problem. I think real people are inconsistent. Real people do say, I'll never do that, and then they do it. You know, so to me, Agatha's creation of him actually makes him seem like more of a real person. You know, where in the Murder of Roger Ackroyd, when he goes and lives in that village so that he can grow marrows. Now, you could look at that and go, Poirot wanting to grow marrows? No. He would want to stay in London and have his marrows delivered from Harrods or something. But actually, I don't think that's inconsistent characterization. I think that's a brilliant way of reflecting the fact that real people sometimes do get it into their heads that they're a totally different kind of person from the kind they actually are. And so they go and do something that's very out of character. And then they discover that it doesn't suit them. So Poirot in Roger Ackroyd discovers that being a marrow grower doesn't really suit him that well. And so by the end of the book, he is no longer intent on growing marrows in the countryside. So yeah, sometimes I do get emails like that, and that's fine. I always love to hear any feedback that readers have. But I think it's quite interesting when readers want fictional characters to be 100% consistent, because real people never are.
Yeah, interesting. One more aspect of the book that I would like to touch upon is the humor. You know, humor is possibly the most difficult form of writing, and not many people are able to do it properly and in a manner in which the reader actually likes it. But when I was reading this particular book of yours, I could find that the humor, the subtle humor in conversations between Catchpool and Poirot couldn't be missed. And I found myself at times just smiling at the conversation and the digs that they take at each other. And how did you manage that? You know, I find that something new in this book compared to the previous three. It was there in bits and pieces earlier, but in this book, it's taken a form of its own. And is that because Catchpool has evolved? Is that because you consciously do it? How do you tackle humor?
So in terms of, from the point of view of me as a writer, humour of that kind, banter and wit and like that sort of back and forth, that actually comes really naturally to me.
Mm-hmm.
I find it much harder to write with no humour. I do sometimes do it, but I find that harder. Yeah, I think Catchpool is evolving in every book. So in this book, he's, well, not actually while the event's taking place, but he's writing the account of this case he and Poirot solved together. And this is the fourth book he's written about his adventures with Poirot. And I think he's starting to actually settle into it and enjoy the fact that he is spinning a yarn. So, you know, he wants to tell accurately what happened to him and Poirot and how they solved this mystery, but he also is enjoying the fact that he's writing a book. So, yeah, I think I'd explain it by saying that Catchpool wants to entertain the reader. So, yes, there's obviously the tension and the mystery, and is Helen, the fiancée, going to be hanged, and what's the truth about the murder? There's all of that. And the main mood of the book is tense mystery solving. But Catchpool also, when he's looking back at the events, he's kind of chuckling to himself about some of them, particularly his conversations with Poirot. And so he wants that humour to come across. And it's also, you know, in Agatha's books, there's a strong vein of humour in many of them. Like there may be the darkness and the danger and the murder, but there's also lots of wit and banter and sort of social observation of a humorous kind. I think that actually is a feature of Agatha's work that makes it so enjoyable.
How do these stories come to you, Sophie? In the sense, and how do you write? In the sense that, how do you plot your stories, and how do you write? In the sense that, do you write your book from page 1 onwards and then plot as you go along, or do you have the entire story in front of you before you start writing? Because I know there are a few writers in this world who actually are writers who just write from page to page. And Jeffrey Archer, for instance, one of them, who doesn't plot his stories beforehand. How do you write? Do you have the entire plot out in front of you before you?
Yeah, so I'm a planner. I always have a thorough, very, very thorough start to finish plan before I start writing. But I only sit down and start writing the plan once I've got enough ideas that I start to feel I can't carry the elements of this story solely in my head anymore. Usually the first idea that will occur to me is the opening mystery, like what's going on and what, you know, it's usually a puzzling scenario or an intriguing scenario where I'm puzzled and I would like to know the solution. Like, why would that ever happen? So I usually start there. Occasionally I'll start with an ending. In Closed Casket, my second Poirot novel, I started with what I thought was an amazing motive for murder. And as soon as I thought of that motive, I was like, I have to write a book in which that is the motive for murder. So with that one, I started with the end and worked back to the beginning. But normally I start with the beginning. So then once I know I really like my initial idea, then other ideas start just appearing and adding themselves to the original idea. And when there's too much for me to cart around in my brain, that's when I start working on a plan. I then do a very, very thorough plan. Then I do lots of editorial work on the plan. Now, not editorial work in terms of making the sentences beautiful. In fact, my plans are very often a complete mess and almost unreadable to anyone else. But for me, the editorial work that I do after my first draft of the plan is kind of structural editorial work. So that's my opportunity. Before I've written any mistakes into an actual book, that's my opportunity to make sure that all the elements of the story and the plot and what happens when, all of everything is in the right position. Then once I'm sure I've got all that structural stuff and plot stuff sorted, then I start writing the actual book. And at that point, I'm no longer making plot decisions. I'm just looking at what's in my plan for each chapter and then writing it and making it come to life as well and as vividly as possible.
Interesting. If you ever had a chance, Sophie, to meet Agatha Christie, what would you want to say to her? apart from a thank you?
I would probably be too scared to meet her. Like, I think people say never meet your heroes. And whenever I really hero worship someone, I'm actually quite glad that I can't meet them. I think it's interesting actually, because I've got a very close friend who doesn't really have heroes in the way that I do. She always says, if you turn someone into a hero in your mind, then you're putting them on a pedestal and it's not realistic. And I agree with her actually, but I just can't help hero worshipping several people. And when I do hero worship people, I always would rather they stayed slightly out of sight and out of reach, like God or the Wizard of Oz. So I'm very happy with just worshipping Agatha from afar. If I did meet her, I would probably be so tongue-tied that I'm not sure I'd be able to ask anything. What I would secretly want to know is, which of my Poirot novels does she like best and why? In fact, I would probably like her to put them in an order of favourite to least favourite and tell me why. That would be fascinating. But then obviously I would never ask that question because she might say, well, I don't like any of them, Sophie. Quite frankly, I don't like any of them. And then I would be devastated. So this is one of the reasons why one should never meet one's heroes.
I'm sure she would never say that. But I was wondering if you would want to know where she disappeared in those 11 days of her life.
No, I wouldn't. It's so funny. So many people are so interested in that whole story. And I'm just not. Like, partly because we know where she was. She turned up at the hotel in Harrogate, the Swan Hotel, which is now where the Harrogate Crime Festival takes place. But to me, she was probably in either that hotel for the whole period or other hotels. I don't think it's mysterious. Her marriage was in trouble at that point. Her husband, Archie Christie, had just told her that he wanted a divorce. And I think he'd also just told her that he was having an affair with a mutual friend. And I think she just thought, I am very miserable with this situation. I'm not happy about the situation. I'm very miserable. And she just wanted to get away from it all. And so she did. One of the big mysteries for me is why anyone thinks that's mysterious. I'm sure loads of people, if they were in a really unhappy personal situation and a new blow happened and their husband said they were divorcing them, anyone might want to run away and go and stay in a hotel somewhere far away. So I'm not convinced there's any more to it than that, really.
I think it's pretty normal that she left her husband and walked away for 11 days because he was troubling her a bit. So, but that's something that's very intriguing. 11 days of Agatha Christie's life. Maybe that's a subject for a mystery novel in itself, maybe.
Well, books have been written about that and films have been made. I think there's probably 3 or 4 books and films that are kind of putting forward fictional versions of what she did during those 11 days. But my guess is she was in a hotel or a series of hotels feeling generally miserable and annoyed with her husband.
How do you think Poirot would have dealt with the 21st century?
Well, I think we've got a clue in some of Agatha's later books about him, because in books like Third Girl and Hickory Dickory Dock, we see him over and over again reacting to modern behaviours, modern fashions, hairstyles, clothes. He's always kind of noticing what the youth of today are doing, saying, wearing. So I think he would have been interested and a keen observer of all the new developments. But the impression I get from reading Agatha's Poirot novels is that he, at a certain point, he starts to feel as though he's no longer in his time and he's entering a more modern time in which he's an old man who he's not quite current anymore. He's like an old person in a new time. Certainly in Third Girl, that sense is very present. So I guess in the 21st century, he'd be even more like that, thinking this is now a very different time from my ideal time.
Or maybe Poirot's grandson comes back in some form.
Yeah. I wouldn't make that happen. As far as I'm aware, Poirot doesn't have any grandchildren. So. I think it's fine for him not to have any grandchildren. And that's why, you know, when HarperCollins and the Christie family and I were all deciding when we wanted my Poirot novels to be set, we all decided that between 1928 and 1932, that was a very good spot for them to slot into, because Agatha didn't write any Poirot novels during that period. So, you know, Poirot's unaccounted for during those years. So that's when my novels about him are set. And I'm really pleased about that, because that is when he's in his heyday, I think. That's when he's at his most Poirot-ish, in the 20s and 30s, maybe early 40s as well.
So moving on from Poirot to your own novels, where do you get the time to write your own books? You know,
when it comes to time, we all have exactly the same amount of it. We all have 24 hours in a day, and we all get to choose how we want to spend those hours. The novelist Danielle Steele, have you heard of Danielle Steele?
Yep.
She writes 22 novels a year.
Wow.
So she obviously doesn't do as much of other things as I do. Yeah, I have found that since I started writing, one of the things that I've got better and better at is using my time efficiently. So it used to take me 3 years. My first published crime novel took me 3 years to write and edit and get right. Now, because I've developed all these systems and processes, and I can do everything more efficiently, and I've got a much more developed and sophisticated editorial sensibility. So I'll have an idea, recognize that it's rubbish, decide not to do it. And that can take 10 seconds. 15 years ago, I would have written the rubbish idea, then tried to rewrite it, then finally given up on it. So I'm just getting more efficient about doing equally good work in a shorter time. Now, the problem with that is, as I've got more efficient, I've started to believe that I can do anything, that there's no such thing as not enough time. And so when someone says, do you want to do this fun, exciting project? I'm like, yes, I do, and I can. And then I do find that sometimes I have to, even being efficient, I have to work more hours than is good for me. So I need to sort of watch that tendency and not take on too much.
You also write a lot of poetry, and then you write self-help books. You write your own crime fiction. How easy or difficult is it to kind of keep shuffling between what you are writing and Agatha Christie novels, and tend to not get confused with the writing styles and maintain completely distinct?
Yeah. I find it really easy because I have a break in between projects. I would find it difficult if I had to one day write Poirot and the next day write a self-help book and the next day write, you know, a contemporary thriller. But I'm a serial writer. So I decide what book I'm writing. I then write only that book until it's finished. And it's a very all-consuming and immersive process. Then I have a really long break before starting writing the next book. So what I'm finding actually, as I have more experience, is that I take less time to do the actual writing and more time having a break and kind of replenishing my creative energy in between books. I'm certainly not, there's a writer friend of mine, she'll write the end on one book on one day, and the very next day she starts her next book. I don't know how she does that. That just blows my mind.
It takes me a lot of time to come out of the book that I'm writing before I actually start something else. So
yeah, and your imagination and your brain needs a bit of a rest and a bit of downtime.
So, Sophie, the other interesting part of yours is your career, your non-writing career, and as an academician. So, tell us more about this master's course that you have at Cambridge that you created and you now run. It sounds very interesting in terms of masters in crime and thriller writing. So,
yeah, exactly. So it's a master's degree program in crime and thriller writing. I co-created it with Midge Gillis, who is the head of creative writing at Cambridge University. And she just said to me, how do you fancy doing a crime and thriller writing master's? I was like, oh, that sounds exciting. I was also very tempted. I was tempted by the fact that it's Cambridge University, which I love. I live in Cambridge. I was already a fellow, and I am a fellow of Lucy Cavendish College. So yeah, I really liked the idea of it. And I knew that all the teaching would happen in this beautiful building called Madingley Hall, which is like something out of an Agatha Christie novel. It's this beautiful old hall with like mullioned stone windows and beautiful views of lawns with like knot gardens and like topiary. It's just stunning. So I thought, oh, fancy teaching there. So it's a brilliant course. It's a 2-year course. It's low residency. And so people travel from all over the world. We have many international students, and you only need to actually be on site in Cambridge for about 12 days in the whole 2 years. So in the first year, we have 4 residential teaching modules. So everyone comes to Madingley Hall and stays for 3 nights and does 4 days of classes. And that happens 4 times throughout the first year. Then the second year is when people go away and work on their big project, which is a crime or thriller novel. And then at the very end, they submit their novel. That's kind of like their dissertation. And they are marked on a combination. I mean, actually, the main component of their mark is for the longer piece, the crime novel, but also some of the creative work they do in the first year, the taught part of the course, also goes towards their overall mark. And we have maximum numbers of 18 in each group. So we will never let in, well, I can't say we never will, but at the moment, the rule is maximum of 18 students per cohort. And it's amazing. Now, unfortunately, just as we were getting going with our first ever cohort, we had the first residential module and it was amazing. It was just such a great experience. But then halfway through the second one, COVID happened and somebody had a cough and everyone had to go home. And many of us weren't even there in the first place, including me, because we'd had symptoms. And so the second one was kind of ruined by COVID. So we've actually done this thing called intermitting, which is where you basically stop a course and then you restart it later. So we're restarting it next February. And so our current cohort can still do their remaining residential modules then. We are also very soon going to be opening applications for the next cohort. So the next cohort will start in September 2021. The first residential module starts on September the 22nd next year. And applications will be opening very soon. So if anyone is interested in applying, please do, because it's an amazing course. And you can find out more details by, if you Google Institute of Continuing Education, Crime and Thriller Masters, the page will come up and you'll find it.
That's wonderful, Sophie. Tell us more about the dream author. I think that's something which is relevant to everybody who wants to write and who probably has a few books. So tell us about it. You know, I read about it and I was really, really, in awe of it. So
Dream Author is not anything to do with a university. It's not an academic thing at all. Dream Author is a coaching program for writers. I realized at a certain point that most of the problems and obstacles that writers face are not external facts in the world. They are things that the writer is thinking, but mistaking for external facts in the world. For example, a writer who has published 3 books and they haven't sold very well might very easily start to think, I'm not a successful writer. You know, other people can be hugely successful. I obviously can't. And that's not true. They are imagining that their past sales figures mean something about their ability to achieve success in future. But what if they just decided that their past sales figures don't mean anything about their ability to create success? Like, before I had my first really successful book, my first really successful book was my first crime novel. And before that, before I started writing crime, I wrote 3 novels that were not crime. None of them sold very well at all. And obviously that was disappointing. But I never even considered looking at those poor sales figures and thinking, this means I'm an unsuccessful writer. What I thought was, those results were disappointing, but I am still totally going to be a massively successful writer. And I don't know when that's going to happen, but at some point I am definitely going to sell a shed load of books. And because I thought that, and I didn't make those sales figures mean that I would always have bad sales figures, I felt energized and ambitious rather than discouraged and miserable. And so, because all of our actions are driven by our feelings, and our feelings are created by our thoughts, really, if we want to achieve the biggest success we can and be as happy as we can as writers, we need to realize that most of our blocks and obstacles are the thoughts we are thinking, not any external facts. And I got really excited about the idea of starting a coaching program. And so that is what I did. And it's now into its second year and it's just taken off. It's just incredible. And the writers are literally transforming their writing fortunes. I had one member who thought that no one would want her book because her sales in the past had been so bad and she was 74. And I coached her extensively for a long time within the Dream Author program. She ended up getting an offer from a big 5 publisher for 400 grand for 2 books. So, and that's just one example. Dozens and dozens of dream authors, as I call them, are achieving huge success using this coaching method. So that's very exciting. Now, if any of you would like information about Dream Author, because there is a special offer on at the moment. And people are joining from everywhere in the world. We've got members in Australia, America, China, everywhere. So if you're interested in Dream Author, and especially in the special offer that's currently on, all you need to do is email me, sophie@sophiehannah.com, and put Dream Author in the subject line, and I will send you the special offer. So that's sophie@sophiehannah.com with Dream Author in the subject line, and I'll send you all the goodies.
I'm sure all the people on this call are going to take you up on that, Sophie. It's an incredible concept. So best of luck for that.
Okay.
So my last question before we move on to questions from the audience is, ever thought about bringing Poirot on a trip to India?
Well, I sort of have and haven't thought about it. So it's crossed my mind because early on I was interviewed by an Indian journalist who suggested it to me. And I thought to myself, yeah, actually I could see that working. But then there are also lots of other locations that I can think, and it's just a question of choosing, which story do I want to tell? Where do I want to set it? But it's certainly something that I would not necessarily rule out.
Okay. So maybe a few years down the line, we'll see a Hercule Poirot set in New Delhi or Bombay or one of those cities.
I'd need to come and do a lot of research first, but it is possible. I can't guarantee it, but I don't want to rule it out.
Sure. So we move on to some audience questions.
Yeah, there's a few questions that we've got. Maybe we'll start with Rohan Joshi. Rohan, if you could unmute yourself and ask your questions, please. Rohan, go ahead.
Hi. There was one question on Ariadne Olivier. Why and how do you think she came about, and who is she really based on? That's question number one. And the second one is in the later Poirot, novels, he's shown to be a devout Catholic, which there was no indication of his, religiosity or whatever you may want to call it prior to that. So when and how do you think this transformation happened on Poirot?
I don't know about the Catholic thing. Not sure about that.
It's on Murder in the Orient Express. If you sort of see the initial scenes, either in the YouTube or in the book, Poirot is shown to be kind of praying to...
oh, yeah. Yeah, but that's not a later Poirot. I mean, Murder on the Orient Express is quite an early one. So I think, probably it was part of his character in all the books that he was a devout Catholic. And it's just that in some of the books it came out more than it did in others. But my assumption has always been that he's always been a devout Catholic. To answer your other question, it seems fairly clear to me that Ariadne Oliver is a character that Agatha created in order to be able to kind of gently poke fun at some aspects of what being a writer is like. So there's a really brilliant bit in one of the books she features in, I can't remember which one, where she's complaining because she has to go and give a talk about her life as a writer. She's sort of saying irritably, she's saying, I don't know why everyone wants to hear about how writers write. It must be obvious, you have an idea and then you write it down and that's it. And why is everyone so interested in hearing writers talk? So I think that is Agatha's way of sort of commenting on writers and the writing life.
Thank you. Next up,
thanks,
a question from Nidhi Sriharsha. Nidhi, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Sophie, for such an interactive session. I think I have been in love with Agatha Christie since a long time, and I really love the world of crime. I find it very interesting and daunting. So I think my question is, since you're constantly dealing with the plot of crime, do you find it difficult being surrounded by all the intense research? And, it's the area of criminology. So do you find it difficult dealing with such thoughts sometimes?
I don't really. And I think that's possibly because, in terms of research, I just do almost as little as I need to for each book. I don't spend huge amounts of time reading about murder and miserable, depressing things like that. So that obviously makes it better. But also, the kind of crime that I write about, where there's a mystery and a solution and it's all very kind of ingenious and clever and clues and all of that, is so different from real crime. Obviously crime fiction has its conventions. The reader wants a mystery to solve. Based on my experience of real crime, because I have done quite a lot of work in prisons in the past where I've gone in as a visiting writer to prisons, real crime doesn't often have an interesting motive or a big mystery. It's just like someone, had anger problems or was drunk and just like killed someone and didn't even really know why. And so for me, fictional crime is a very different thing from real crime. And that's why, what I love about crime fiction is the mystery. I'm not particularly interested in crime or murder. I'm interested in mysteries and puzzles and solving them and human psychology much more than the actual crime.
Thank you.
Up next, we've got a question from Akshara Mahesh. Akshara, you will have to unmute yourself, please.
Hi, I just wanted to know, how did you retain the character of Poirot and all his characteristics while still adding your own touch? Was that quite challenging?
So I wrote about Poirot as if he was a real person in real life that I know. I just wrote about him as if I was writing about someone I know from my own life, which in a way he is, right? Because I've read all the books about him and I've watched all the TV adaptations. And I didn't really try to make him different or change him in any way. I just saw my job as being to write about Agatha Christie's Poirot as she created him.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Sachdev Ramakrishna, your question next, please.
Thank you. Sophie, it's splendid to hear you, and I think it's been a fantastic session. I just was curious about your book on happiness.
Oh, yeah.
66 ways to solve it. Why 66? And of course, happiness. That is so relevant these times. So thank you.
Yeah. So the book is actually called Happiness, a Mystery, and 66 attempts to solve it. And the reason it's called that is that in the book, I approach happiness as if it's a mystery that I'm setting out to solve. What is happiness? Where do we find it? How do we find it? How do we achieve it? And I think in the introduction to the book, I actually say, I'm going to be like the Poirot in this investigation, and I'm going to go and pursue the trail of clues, and I'm going to look at the case files so far, and I'm going to solve the mystery of happiness. And one of the other things I say in the introduction is, why 66? If you're asking the question, why 66, then that means that you are the ideal sidekick to solve the mystery with me. Right. And I can't say any more than that because it would be a spoiler.
Splendid. I'm going to run to a bookshop and grab a copy. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks.
Up next, we have a question from Lata Reddy. Lata, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Yeah, well, my question was just, how do you change your creative style when you write your poetry, your own novels, and the Poirot novels?
Well, the styles are obviously very different for all three, but it's not, I'm never aware of changing my style. What happens is, if I know that I'm going to be writing, for example, Poirot, then when I go into my writing room and sit down and get ready to start writing, my imagination, without me even having to instruct it particularly, it just makes that shift into Poirot mode, so that when I start typing, I'm already in Poirot mode in my brain. And the same happens with my contemporary thrillers, with poetry, with my self-help books, with my podcast. Oh, I should tell you this as well. If any of you do not know, I have a podcast which is completely free to listen to, and it's called How to Hold a Grudge. And it's a self-help podcast all about how we can process anger and grudges and deal with the annoyingness of some of the people in our lives in a way that actually makes us happier and more forgiving. So sometimes I'm podcasting about grudges and anger, and other times I'm writing mysteries, and I just, in the spaces between the different activities, my subconscious and my imagination just do whatever work they need to, so that I arrive at each one in that mode to do that one.
Well, the reason I asked is because I read your book, The Narrow Bed, and I found that absolutely fascinating. And I've also read 2 of your Poirot novels. I'm looking forward to reading the new one. And, you know, I could see a complete shift in your style. And I thought that must be so difficult. But the way you explain it, it comes very easily to you.
Yeah, and what's so weird is when I think of my Poirot novels and then The Narrow Bed, they could absolutely have been written by 2 different people, and I can see what you mean. It's so different, but no, it all comes out of the same weird brain. So obviously, my imagination is just like doing these subtle shifts, and that's really lucky, because otherwise, if I was trying to write a Poirot novel and my contemporary novel voice kept popping up, that would be very inconvenient.
Yes, but we all wish we had your wonderful brain. And as I said, I can't wait to read your new book. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Up next, Sachin Mule, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question, please go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is more in terms of, is there any chance of adapting your Poirot to the screen, to the big screen?
I think there's a chance, because you know, it could always happen, but there are certainly no plans at the moment. I think all the film and TV people are still very keen on doing new versions of Agatha's stories, and I think for as long as that remains the case, and this sort of Agatha screen revival remains ongoing, I don't think the family, the Christie family, would particularly want to muddy the waters and bring in new Poirot stories to the sort of screen operation. I could be wrong, but I suspect that if mine were ever to be adapted, it would only be quite some way into the future. And I have to say, I am very happy with them not being done for film and TV, because I kind of feel as though I love TV, I love film, but I think it's very hard to adapt a book and get all of its kind of magic onto the screen. It can be done. I mean, I think David Suchet as Poirot on many occasions succeeded brilliantly, and it's like, wow, this really is as brilliant as the book, or not quite, but nearly. But more often, when books are adapted for the screen, then they don't anywhere near live up to the book. So I'm very happy for my books to remain as books.
Lovely. I think that's about time we have. Ravi, any last questions that you had before we let Sophie go?
No, I've asked all of my questions, so I'm
Excellent.
fine.
Well,
it was a wonderful conversation. I just loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, likewise. Delightful conversation. Thank you so much, Ravi. And of course, thank you, Hannah.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Saturday evening, really well spent for most of us here in India. And hope to be able to do this in person sometime soon.
Yes, I would love to come back. I have such fond memories of sitting by that swimming pool and like thousands of people walking over. Do you remember? I was just there on my little lounger next to the pool and everyone was like, what's that woman doing in a swimming costume? Like, right in the middle of these crowds, but I'm an obsessive swimmer. So yeah, I would love to come back.
Yeah, we really hope so too, and we'll be sure to have you back again when we can.
Excellent.
Lovely. Hope your book does really well, Sophie. Thanks so much for being with us again. And Ravi, thank you once again. Absolute pleasure, like always.
And Sophie, it was wonderful chatting to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lovely to talk to you. Bye.